You know who I love? Max Wolf. Maximus, better known by his nickname of Max Wolf, is a character from the 2021 requel of Gossip Girl portrayed by Thomas Doherty. That's right, audience. Harry Hook is on Gossip Girl and I love him. I love him. I did not know what a comfort character was until I saw him. But this is not about my obsessions. Yet. Because on the surface, Max Wolf is a pansexual hedonist playboy who only cares about himself and what can benefit him. However, when you do a little digging, go through the wiki, and then rewatch every Max-centric episode there is several times over because you have nothing better to do, you realize that he's a much more layered and complex character than you thought, and maybe the most complex in the entire show. So, I'm just Julia, and this is the comprehensive character analysis of Maximus Wolf. Throughout the show, Max has three main plot lines: the Rafa plot, his dad's, and then his throuple with Aki and Audrey. All these plots put together create Max's super objective, and for those of you who were lucky enough to not take theater in high school, you probably don't know what a super objective is, so in simple terms, it is a character's overarching goal, what they work for throughout the entire story. And for Max, his super objective is unconditional love, something he feels he doesn't already have or is in a constant threat of losing because of some underlying issues. And what are those issues? I am so glad you asked. I spent so much time on this. Throughout the show, we can see that Max as a character is incredibly naive. Now, I don't mean naive like a small child. He still has an understanding of the world outside and around him. However, because Max grew up in such immense wealth, he has the privilege to ignore things that make him uncomfortable, which means he often runs on what is basically kid logic and cannot handle stress in any capacity, often turning to drugs, alcohol, and sex so he can numb his pain and not think about his emotions. And this, mixed with his desire for unconditional love, gets him into a lot of very toxic and abusive relationships. Namely, with his classics teacher, Rafa Kaparos. Let's dive into that, shall we? When Rafa and Max first cross paths, Rafa is uninterested, yet not seemingly opposed to the idea of hooking up. Gross. While Max is simply looking for excitement. Rafa turns Max down, but he keeps trying anyways. This, however, also happens to coincide with a plot involving Max's dads. Gideon and Roy, Max's dads, are incredibly loving towards him. However, Roy specifically has a lot of internalized homophobia he needs to work out. However, his husband is a very flamboyant man, so instead of working out his problems with, say, a therapist, he cheats on his husband, which Max catches wind of, and then creates a scheme involving Aki catfishing his own father by pretending to be Rafa so he can expose his dad, and hopefully his dads will talk it out. A prime example of Max's kid logic, and expectantly, this does not go as planned. It blows up in his face. His dads do not work things out, instead they separate and divorce. So now, fueled by sorrow and substances, Max goes to Rafa's doorstep. Not for sex, but for comfort, because right now, Rafa is the only adult Max feels he can trust right now, who won't be too mad at him or blame him. Because, did I forget to mention, Roy blamed Max for all of this. So Rafa, seeing this incredibly inebriated child who probably won't make it home without becoming a street pancake, allows Max to cry on his shoulder and sleep on his couch. This is one of only 2 times we see Rafa be a responsible adult with Max.
I'm joined by a guest. Say hi, Chummy.
Anyway, after Max's life falls apart, he goes on a week-long bender, if not longer, and no one has seen him in days! And they don't seem to care, except for, like, Aki. And no one thinks to, you know, call the cops, because for all they know, he could be dead. And once again, Rafa, this boy's would-be abuser, cares more about his well-being and safety than his own friends and fathers. But you know what? Rafa does actually end up finding Max trying to get into a party that he actually made sure Max would not be able to get into because he knows this boy is on every drug imaginable right now. And in Rafa's last act as a responsible adult, he takes Max away from the party, confiscates his drugs, and then gets him to talk to his dad. More on that in a moment. Anyway, later on, Max miraculously makes it back to Rafa's apartment in one piece, and we find out that Roy still blames him for everything, and Max thinks there is something wrong with him now. Rafa assures him that he is in fact not broken, and then they screw. Hooray. So remember when I said we're gonna circle back to how Rafa got Max to talk to his dad? Well, Rafa did that by explaining to Max that his own family actually disowned him. This is a lie. However, Max does not know that, which further traps him in this relationship, because now he thinks he is all Rafa has. He believes that Rafa loves him. Rafa is his escape, and Rafa is giving him dopamine hits so he can distract himself from his own pain. He thinks that Rafa needs him. In fact, he says as much to Aki in episode 5.
Rafa cares about me. Do you know nothing about him? He's had a hard life. His family disowned him. He's got no one, and I want to fill that void.
And Rafa is such a good escape for him that Max makes him the only person in his life, cutting off basically all of his relationships that aren't Rafa. Now, Max doesn't find out about the truth about Rafa until Aki reveals it to him, and he finds out about Rafa's reputation for sleeping with seniors at Constance. Now, when he tries to cut things off with Rafa, he tries to keep him within his grasp by saying that his friends don't care about him, thus keeping Max dependent on him for happiness. Luckily, Max knows that is false and reconnects with his friends. However, Rafa, instead of being a responsible adult and turning himself into the police for sleeping with an intoxicated minor on several occasions, spreads a rumor about Max via Gossip Girl that he has an STD and then tries to fuck his dad. Incredibly fucked up. I know. And it only gets worse. Get back at Rafa, Max sends a video to Gossip Girl of him and Rafa having sex. And Rafa, knowing Max is plotting revenge, joins the little Gossip Girl cohort run by teachers, and then takes the account hostage and forces the other two teachers running it to, stalk Max and get blackmail on a child just as a fallback plan in case things go not Rafa's way. Luckily, that blackmail is not acquired after Rafa sees a video of Max sounding at least a little remorseful and explaining things to his dads, who are concerningly chill about this whole situation. And then he resigns from his job at Constance and gets off scot-free. Good God. So already we can see that Max's kid logic and his inability to handle stress often lead him to gravitate towards anyone or anything that he deems as giving him love. I also realize I never explained what I mean when I say Max runs on kid logic. But basically, Max grew up sheltered and unfathomably wealthy. Not to mention his dad's doing just about everything in their power to make sure he lives the life that he does. So when Max is faced with something he can't handle or doesn't know how to deal with, he, like a small child would, shuts down, just in a much more adult way. He relies on drugs, alcohol, and sex to deal with his problems, which are, yes, activities mature in nature, but the reason is childish at their core. When you boil these actions down and then look at Max, a 17-year-old kid with a pattern of isolation, you stop seeing the suave playboy and instead you start seeing a scared little boy. Because when kids are scared, they go to an adult, and Max, who is still a kid, when he is mortified after he did what he believes was a terrible thing to his fathers, goes to the one adult he feels he can trust, Rafa. And it is no longer about wanting sex from him, it is about wanting comfort and safety. And to his credit, Rafa does give Max what he's looking for by keeping him out of danger and showing him affection, which then Max starts perceiving as acts of love, especially after they hook up. In fact, when Aki tries to intervene and tell Max he's worried about this affair, Max tells him that Rafa makes him happy and to just go away and not get involved. Max truly isn't the laissez-faire playboy he pretends to be. He's a kid, a very scared and isolated kid who just wants to be loved. And just to gush about this show for a minute, I think Thomas Doherty does a fantastic job portraying these emotions in these couple episodes. Starting with giving Max these confidently crossed legs and small little hand gestures in episode 1, to being slouched over and more dramatic in episode 3, and even his eyes widening as he gets more and more emotional until he breaks down and cries, curling into Rafa's chest like he is hiding and trying to make himself as small as possible. And anyway, enough with my gushing. Though Max has gotten himself into his fair share of unhealthy relationships on his own, let's look at what his basis for love is. His dad's. Gideon Wolf and Roy Sachs both deeply care for Max. However, the relationship with each other isn't all that great. It's established in season 1, episode 9 that Roy didn't grow up in a very loving environment. He had a mother with a lot of expectations for him and actively discouraged his more feminine interests. And these things his mother instilled in him from a very young age, hi Summer, stayed with him well into his adulthood. And then, when he met Gideon, a very feminine and flamboyant man, he let those feelings fester, and instead of talking them through, instead they got separated and then were divorced for most of the show until working things out actually, and then getting remarried in season 2. Now, how does this affect Max? Because this kid had to watch everything unfold in front of him. And until his dad sit him down and talk about it in season 2 on the day of their wedding, they just kind of let him believe that this is all his fault for months, because it becomes very clear that Gideon and Roy don't really keep a good eye on Max. Like, yes, he is 17, but he is still legally a minor and therefore legally still your problem. You should be keeping a better eye on your son, given all the things he's done and has had done to him. But I digress. Honestly, Gideon and Roy, they are some of the better sets of parents in the show, and they do raise Max to be his true authentic self. However, they are a little too lax and often are very concerningly okay with a lot of things that Max has done. And they are honestly some of the better parents in the show and are the probably least morally deplorable out of the characters. To complete the trifecta of damages to Max's mental state, his exes! Aki Menzies and Audrey Hope are Max's ex-boyfriend and ex-girlfriend. Double A spends most of season 1 trying to grapple with their feelings for Max, and then they spend season 2 all in a throuple until it crashes and burns when Max dumps them at the Met Gala. Now, why is this bad? Because as the throuple goes on, it becomes glaringly obvious that Aki and Audrey don't love Max. They love the idea of Max. Max entered Aki and Audrey's lives when they themselves weren't in a good spot, but they liked the dopamine rush Max gave them, so they tried to keep him. Through repeated harassment until they broke him down, but I digress. We're gonna break down the throuple, person by person, and then we're gonna see where Max's mental damage really came from. Starting with Aki. Now, Aki is honestly the lesser of two evils here. Before the throuple, he did actually check on Max and make sure he was okay after his life was falling apart and got him out of the situation with Rafa. But then until the throuple, he doesn't really interact with Max unless he needs his help, i.e. getting him out of legal trouble. But once they do get in the throuple, they're very close, it's very cute, but then Aki cheats on Max and Audrey. Well, cheats, it was a kiss, but he covered it up so it's more so like the principle. And well, it's a betrayal of trust, and Max has trust issues, and very rocky logic about his love life. So, you know, not great. However, again, Aki's the lesser here. Let's get into the real perpetrator, shall we? So, from the get-go, Audrey does not treat Max like a person. She treats him like an inconvenience unless she wants something. Their entire relationship starts because Audrey cheated on Aki with Max because she was mad at him and then told him not to say anything. However, in the wise words of Max himself, if she didn't want it getting out, maybe she should have done it in the first place. And then, Audrey gets mad when Max calls her out while drunk for cheating on Aki. And then, once his spiral begins, she kinda cares until the drunken confession happens, and then she goes back to treating him like an inconvenience until she wants something. Namely, she asks Max to do a huge favor for her mother by inviting her to a closed Hanukkah dinner under the compromise that she would not be there, and then proceeds to invite herself to this closed celebration and spends the whole night prodding Max to do her more favors. Hey, quick cut in from editing, Julia. I forgot to mention in the script, shut up, that Max did actually call out Aki and Audrey for their mistreatment. I just forgot to mention it, so here's a clip.
I don't think you understand. I want nothing to do with you. I've been your dealer, your sex toy, your therapist, your agent and lawyer. But one thing that I've never been to you is your friend, because if I were, you would notice how how much it goddamn hurts every time you use me to make yourself feel and seem and look better.
And then, once the throuple begins, it is the same deal. She likes him when she wants something, and then she gets mad when he calls her out. And honestly, what hurts the most about this is that Max genuinely wants to be good enough for Audrey. He will bend over backwards to make her happy, often putting his own wants and needs aside for the sake of her own. And honestly, this is just the throuple in pieces. You haven't even seen them as a whole yet. The throuple is about as functional as a pair of pleasers. Fun and cute for a few minutes, but then you can't get downstairs without eating shit. It becomes very clear that none of them were ready for a relationship. Aki and Audrey didn't want to admit that they weren't right for each other anymore, and Max was actively burying his mental issues instead of dealing with them. Also, Aki and Audrey very clearly did not know how to fit Max in their dynamic. They tried once, and it sounded more like divorced parents than a polyamorous relationship. Honestly, they treat Max the way kids would a puppy. They give him love and affection when they want to, and then when he actually needs love and it's not on their terms, they kind of just ignore him. Julia, that kind of sounds like a bit of a stretch. My brother in Christ, Max called it out himself.
Okay, this is not a relationship. This is the love story of Aki and Audrey, and sometimes Max. We need a little something extra.
So, as mentioned earlier, the throuple does not last. In fact, if you do the math, they barely make it 4 months. But what does this mean for Max? Since Max is someone who only ever wanted unconditional love and ended up with Aki and Audrey, whose love was conditional, this does not bode well for him. In fact, once they break up, he spends presumably months in Europe drunkenly stumbling through the streets alone. Don't do that. Because here's the thing, Max is someone who runs on kid logic and has been hurt repeatedly. So when he gets hurt for what he considers the final time, he doesn't process it. He shuts down, and he shuts down hard. What's this got to do with unconditional love? Well, all these events show just how desperate Max is for unconditional love. He will cling to any relationship that shows him any form of affection and that love he's looking for. So then, when those relationships fall apart, he falls apart. And by the end of season 2, Max has no one. Aki, his only real support, is now his ex, and he wants nothing to do with him. So now, he's walking around the streets of London, presumably, alone, and trying to numb his pain by falling back into old habits. All he wanted was one thing, and was repeatedly denied it. He just wanted to be loved. Someone give this boy a hug. That's all for this video. Sorry that it took so long, but Max is like my definition of a comfort character because he went through a lot of things I did, just way worse, so I really wanted to like do him justice, if that makes sense. I'm gonna have one more Gossip Girl video come out eventually. That one's probably gonna take longer, but then I'm probably gonna pivot over to like the Percy Jackson franchise because I recently just read through like the entire series, like from the original 5 books all the way up to Sun and the Star. Also, tell me what you want to see in that regard and I'll try to make it happen. Anyway, that's all, and I'll see you next time. I love you!